Good afternoon. I am glad to welcome you here at this roundtable that will be dedicated to the efficient aquaculture farming. I'd like to say a few words as a beginning. We have to state nowadays that we do not say whether, we do not think whether aquaculture is necessary, is needed or not. We understand perfectly well that we have been already used to this fish that will be produced in aquaculture farming, and the world ocean cannot cater for our needs, and aquaculture business is quite a complicated thing, and biology is quite different of those organisms, and their habitat is quite hostile if compared to ours, and our industry is very difficult from the point of view of being systematized, and all the water bodies are different, the diseases are different. That's why it's so important to exchange our expertise, knowledge and experience, not to repeat the mistakes that have been already committed, and we have to look for more efficient methods and way of working. Today, we have a number of very good, informed speakers that have been in this business for a long period of time, and probably they will be able to give us a piece of advice and some recommendations. Let's listen to one another, let's ask questions, and I'm quite confident that it will be a very useful discussion at our roundtable. And the first speaker, Mr. Roman Vitizev, please, the floor is yours, the chairman of Far Eastern Union of Mariculture Enterprises. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear guests. The topic of my report, the efficient aquaculture of the Far East, and I'd like to tell you that the new history of the Far East in terms of the aquaculture started in 2010, and there we got, as in a tender process, some new land plots, and a number of enterprises were engaged in this work. There were very few large companies present there, and the results were worse than expected. In the reports of the scientific community and officials, it looked quite optimistic compared to other countries, the plans for millions of tons and large areas that were given to us. And in Japan, the indicators of aquaculture were quite promising in coastal regions, and in China the volume exceeded the volume of aquatic biological resources in Russia, but the efficiency issues raised, and it's not accidental because we have not had this experience in Russia. And where can we take these technologies from, taking into consideration the specificity of the Far East? And of course we have to have a look at Asian countries, China, Korea, Japan. From 2015 to 2020, aquaculture has become quite interesting in the Far East for top 5 largest companies in Asian Pacific region, and foreigners presented us with a list of risks. The first one, that the land plots were very small, and the price of water was too high, and the legislation has not been adapted to the specificity of activities. And to mitigate those natural risks and other risks related to aquaculture, we had to safeguard the perimeter, and we did not have the separation between the land bodies and water bodies, and 1,000 hectares was the minimum area requested by foreigners in China, and in Japan it is 2,000 hectares and not less than that. And after the law on aquaculture was adopted and the land plots were allocated in 2017 and 2020, the situation changed. changed. We were given 60,000 hectares of water bodies for 300 users. Two land plots amounted to more than 2,000 hectares, and the majority of them were less than 200 hectares. Some of the users tried to purchase land plots at an auction in order to get the control of the water area, and that led to the increase of prices. However, professional large investors did come to the Far East, for example, from China, and they had not less than 20,000 hectares in China and about 40,000 tons of production per year. Unfortunately, all the investors obtained zero results, and they failed, and there are different man-made and natural reasons, and we found out that foreign colleagues were right. We have first to eliminate administrative barriers that impede the development of the sector, and then we will be able to minimize the risks of investors. And we would like to make our farms efficient, and foreign partners want the same. And I'd like to focus on the following. We propose that the users could get larger land plots, and of course they will have to pay for that, and we have to expand it there where water cannot be given to any other users, and of course we have to comply with environmental legislation, and we have to take into consideration the scientific interests and the business interests of the parties involved. And we would like to mitigate risks and to ensure the safety for users, and we have to eliminate this patchwork of land plots that we currently have, with the gaps that we see there. We do not have any control over the coastal line, and that will lead to fewer losses in production, and we will have fewer conflict situation because of the actions of third parties. We will be able to control coastal areas, especially it is relevant for grazing, and we will be able to give the possibilities to for rotation, especially under the condition of natural disasters like the storms, and it will improve the conditions of survivability. And I'd like to note that Mr. Trutnev, our vice minister, has given us certain errands. It has not been resolved yet, but we hope that it will happen soon. Thank you. If there are any questions, I will be glad to answer them. Thank you, Roman. Could you please tell us whether you already have some mechanism or roadmap how we can change this situation also in legislative framework? What has to be done? I'd like to know that our union and our colleagues from field-oriented organizations are closely interacting with the regulator, with the Federal Agency for Fisheries at different platforms, and also the All-Russian Union. I'm a member there. We are raising all those issues, but unfortunately it is a very slow process. And it's a very good question about a roadmap. This initiative was put forward at the 5th Eastern Economic Forum. Unfortunately, it was not put into practice. And of course, it would be good to resolve those pending issues and to systematize them in a roadmap, and to move forward, though it can be a slow process. Thank you, Roman. Colleagues, if you have questions after the report, you can raise your hand and ask a question. Thank you once again, Roman. The next speaker is Alexander Novikov, President of the Union of Sturgeon Breeders. Now, sturgeon is a very important topic. It's our national fish, and we would like that sector to be developed and to grow. But there are certain difficulties. We do not see thousands of tons of sturgeon being produced. We'd like to ask Alexander about what is happening. Why do we not see any growth? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We always want to speak about success, about progress that we are making, about some special things, but we do not have anything we can boast about. The industry is developing very slowly, and we see a kind of stagnation there. And it is due to the fact that on the market we have a lot of counterfeit products. And it is cheap caviar that comes to us from China, both legally and illegally. And I can say that during the first half of the year, the volume of caviar that we got from China, from other countries like Italy and Germany, exceeded 10 times volume that we had last year. Unfortunately, the problem is actually quite simple. The caviar that we get, the foreign caviar, is not sold as a foreign caviar. It is relabeled and it is sold as Russian caviar. We drew the attention to that, and we initiated serious meetings. Also, meetings held by the Cabinet of Ministers of the Russian Federation and the government, though nothing has done, that the controlling bodies do not pay attention to it, and this situation leads to the industry being stagnated, because who will enter this sector and this industry as investor, who will invest money and risk their money in the first 8 years when you get first caviar, if we talk about this sturgeon production? As I have already mentioned, it's quite a serious problem. If we take last year and 2019, the production of caviar, according to statistics, amounted to 53,000 kilos. But we did not see any foreign caviar there on the shelves. But officially, about 24,000 kilos was imported from China. So when we have a look at this statistics, we ask ourselves the question, how much caviar was produced? And it turns out that more than one half that we see on the shelves is a counterfeit product. We will try to tackle this problem, but nowadays, the growth is only shown by small farms, and they have their circular systems in place. And there are some people who are quite open, who tend to share their experience, and it helps us and other people to make this a family business. They wouldn't like to become large businesses, large companies, and locally it helps us to meet the demands with those installations. Though we see some globalization trend in aquaculture, the more enterprises we have, the lower the net cost is, and it is more profitable for us. But in our situation, it is vice versa, because we do not have large projects, we do not have large, big investors, and I sincerely hope that the situation will change somehow, because a number of regulations have been adopted, and it will help us to eliminate this counterfeit production, and also law enforcement bodies taking part in this process. And I think it will not be quite profitable to bring caviar to Russia. And I'd like to give you this kind of information for you to understand the situation. The average price for caviar amounts to $163 per kilo. So just imagine the difference that is being sold here in Russia. It's about 40 to 50,000 rubles, and of course nobody wants to freeze his or her money waiting for 8 years when the caviar will be there, when they can invest into some other sector or some other area. And I'd like to say that there is an interest towards this industry, and those people who risk their money and their labor that they are investing into that. And the development is ongoing, it's gradual, not only in central Russia, where it is a tradition to breed sturgeon, the southern regions. Also, we see the development in Siberia and in the Far East. Slowly, there are enthusiasts who are entering the sector and developing it. So that is what we see happening in our industry. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Alexander. If there are any questions, I will be glad to answer them. And do you have to engage in this caviar business? Well, we were quite concerned and preoccupied by the situation with China, because China is the largest producer of sturgeon in the world. And there will be too much fish coming from them. But the opposite happened. It was a non-standard fish for Chinese, though they liked it, and about 95% of fish raised there is consumed domestically in China. But caviar is not consumed in China. There is no tradition of caviar consumption there, and it is not thermally processed. That's why they do not eat it. Thank you, Alexander. Any questions from the audience? Please take the microphone so that everybody can hear you. The World Fund of the Wildlife. What about the illegal trade? And of course, we understand that the counterfeit products are present there. It's a very complicated question. I will explain to you why. Because in the past, illegal production of caviar was tracked carefully, and we understood that on the market, if you see there's some caviar, and you understood which volume the market had. But now, quite often, those who are trading on the market, they deceive clients. They say that we have the genuine Caspian caviar, but instead of that, they just sell Chinese caviar that was raised in aquaculture, and they bought that for that amount of money that I mentioned before. So today it is very difficult to understand what volume is actually this poacher's caviar and what is not, what is a counterfeit production, I would call it like this, coming from aquaculture from China. I can give you some approximate figures, but I can be mistaken. So the major volume comes from the Far East, and this is the main channel of the pouches products. But I can estimate that at minimum, the volume, about 120 tons per year. It is 2 times more than we produce domestically in Russia.
Thank you. Well, no further questions. Let's proceed. Mr. Pozaraisky, first deputy of the chair of the association uniting hundreds of farms. Well, what will you be talking today, Victor? Let me talk about the major principles that are being implemented in the program on the development of aquaculture. There was a law on aquaculture enacted in 2014, which subdivided it into the commercial products production and renewal of the water and biological resources. And aquaculture became part of the agriculture. It's one of the sectors of farming. It was subdivided into ponds, industrial and grazing. That's how it is being developed now. Since 2020, the indicators of the development of the commercial aquaculture were shifted from the state program of the development of fishing into the agriculture program. The reason why that all this support to the aquaculture is provided by the Ministry of Agriculture. And it refers to the products of raising products, including the seeding materials. The statistics is being collected by the ministry, taking into consideration this indicator. The basic year of the state program is 2017, and that's the reference year. A few figures. The total production output of the aquaculture has grown by 1.5 times by 2014. The major leaders in our northwest and far east federal districts. It is 2.1 and 5.1 times. As far as species are concerned, number one are cyprinids, 10% by 2017, salmon, 6.3, the growth is 2.2, seafood 30.3, and it is times 3.3 by the reference year. That's what happened in 2020. The first 6 months of 2021, the growth rate is 27%, both in production and sales. Support measures rendered by the state. As I said, it is within the framework of the agriculture development program. The emphasis is placed on the credits, soft credits, and in accordance with the Decree 340 that was issued in June 2020. The highest road loan in demand, it is the soft credit to buy feed, forage fish. Some 95% of all the money that is used for that from all the loans. Then acquisition of the gear, and then the refurbishment and construction of the enterprises for the loans with the different period of between 2 and 8 years. And another focus is taking loans for the construction of the hatcheries. So there are good opportunities to receive the loans. Within the framework of the same state program, there is an addendum 7 and 8 describing the support to the aquaculture, mini and micro enterprises. Another issue is insurance. Normally, the insurance is taken by the farms that raise sturgeon and salmon. The state that compensates 50% of the premium that is paid to the insurance companies. Figures: early in 2021, that's the latest data, there were 4.3 million fish has been insured, and you understand how important it was to insure it under the climatic fluctuations. At the initiative of the Recirculating, 2 laws were adopted. One was adopted in 2021. It regulated a number of the issues related to fish farming in ponds and pens that are created by the hydrographic facilities like power plants. And the law has entered into force. And another thing, the conflicts between the land and the water code have been eliminated. It refers to Article 102. The lands that have been covered by water do not change their status. Earlier, the owner or the renter will acquire land, but if the land is flooded, it is not transferred to the land of the water table stock. This issue, this thing is quite important, because we did have cases when the purchase contracts or lease contracts for the ownership of the land, and the owner, or it was acquired from the federal agency. Well, it's the agency that is responsible for the privatization. What's the name of it? Anyway, it's the property management, the Federal Property Management Committee. And all those all those contracts were considered void and null then if it was flooded. There is another decree adopted in July 2021. It's about the amendments to the tax code. It will enter into force since 2022, and it reads that the farms will be exempted from value-added tax for sales of the embryos and the juveniles and the live fish for breeding. And another thing, it relates to the tax code as well. Freshwater trout will be taxable at the rate of 10% for VAT. These are the things that are happening as far as applicable law is concerned. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. How vigorously do the farmers use state support measures? Well, quite vigorously. And the things that I've mentioned are the federal level assistance. There are also support measures provided at the regional level, quite good money. What is needed for that? The constituent entity of the region should have the guidelines on inclusion of the aquaculture as one of the industry to enjoy support. Leningrad region, Moscow, Chelyabinsk, and some others. What do they spend their money for? They provide subsidies for the feed, for the forage, and they also compensate the expenses of the farming equipment and also construction of some of the facilities. They provide subsidies also for the anti-epidemiology activities and some other things as well. The list is quite wide. Thank you. Victor, any questions? Go ahead. I am from the Siberia Investment Group, Oleg Khazayev. In 2024, the direct subsidies program will be over, and there will be just subsidies provided to cover the interest rates. And many enterprises need that kind of support to be attractive borrowers for the eyes and to attract the subsidies using that framework. Will there be any measures taken by Recirculating and the other association to lobby it with the government? Sorry, I do not understand you. How do you get the subsidies? Is it part of the program of the development of the fishing industry or what? Yes. Okay, now I understand your question. And the federal agency finishes the program when the investment contracts expire, because the interest rate was subsidized, wasn't it? These were not capex as well. Well, if I understand it right, Vasily Igorevich made a presentation at one of the previous questions, and he mentioned that they are trying to resolve the issue related to capex, but so far there is no state support for that. But there were also subsidies provided through the constituent entity of the Russian Federation. And there was an agreement between the head of the regions and Rosrybolobstvo. And the Ministry of Agriculture scheme is not related to the subsidies, but it is the ministry using their own money. They pay partially the interest rates, and the money is not passing through the regions, through the governments. This scheme of support is short-circuited. And of course, the best part of support is indeed paying it to the banks some of the borrowed money. Are there any precedents of ensuring the recirculating aquaculture systems? Because the RAS risks are different from the standard risks, and the insurance companies are not willing to insure the RAS. What are you raising? Trout? Well, okay, but that doesn't matter all that much. Okay, when there was a list of risks made, then the natural risks, the infections, that would occur time to time, and technogenous, anthropogenous. And so there was no harm caused by the third party listed into the list of insurance. And if you're insuring it, and since you need power, you need it, and some force majeure with the stoppage of the power supply are insured, because it is included into the list of the cases that are insured. Did you address the insurance companies, or what? Did they refuse to insure you? They don't know how they should refer to us, and we do have the technogenous risks, or there might be a stoppage because of the disruption of the gas supplies or failure of the equipment. And they cannot give us an answer, and they cannot calculate the premium, insurance premium. Well, and they're idling for some 4 months. Okay, what I can advise you, some of the insurance do not have the experience of providing insurance to aquaculture, and I can recommend you to turn to the military insurance company, and they have been insuring this sector for quite some time. Okay, let's go on. And for us to be able to subsidize something, we should get loans one way or another, to get credits. The next speaker is Mr. Denis Pritula, Deputy Director for Corporate Business, Large Projects from Sovcombank. Will you take the floor, please, and tell us how cheap credits could be given to the farmers? Okay, I'm Denis Pritula from Sovcombank, and I'm responsible for project financing, and a few words about the bank. And since not all of you know what our bank is about, so the first slide shows the current position of the bank. We are significant organizations included into the top banks. We are number 3 private bank in Russia. We have 9 million clients, more than 900 legal persons. We have more than 2,000 offices, and we are falling behind the Sberbank, but it's quite high, and the head count is almost 18,000 people. This slide might be boring for you, but it is worth to mention that our credit rating is quite high. That's why we can handle budget allocations of the Russian Federation, and we can deal with the pension funds.
So what services do we offer? We have the full lists for different legal entities, opening an account, providing bank guarantees and other types of services, everything what you need for your business entity. Also, we actively participate in all the federal subsidized loans programs and 696 program there. We've become the largest private bank for the number of loans that were part of this program, and we were ranked third in the second program on the federal level. The previous speakers have mentioned institutional support for different programs, and 1528 we also form a part of this program, and these are the basic terms and conditions of operation. No, it's not about the program, it's about the bank guarantees, and we have a strong position there as well. We have the FinTender platform, and we have about 30% out of all guarantees in federal law number 44, and we do that quite fast, and we provide all the technological support. I tried to be brief, and we will be glad to see you at our offices, a lot of different branches and offices. Have you had an experience of granting loans to fish farms? Well, we provided loans for turnover loans, and the reason I came here is looking for investment projects. And as for this program 1528, we are cooperating with one of the entities in Moscow regions. Thank you, Dennis. Any questions? Thank you. Efficient fish farm is not possible without science. And I'd like now to give the floor to Mr. Alexei Mishkin, who is the head of VNIRO, Freshwater Fisheries Branch, Russian Federal Research Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Let's talk about science. It's high time we did it. I'd like to remind you, first of all, probably we forgot about it, what science has done for the development of aquaculture. Before that, we used to call that fish farming, and it was directly linked to science. Any advanced state-of-the-art technologies that were implemented into the production, it led to the increase and the development of fish farming, and we can enumerate all the achievements that we had. But in the 1990s, we did not have the best times for science development. Fortunately, we have survived, and now a lot of people ask themselves, what can science give us in the modern world? Present-day world. I'd like to start with the safeguarding and protecting health, and I will give you just some examples because the list is quite exhaustive. We all know that according to official statistics, the fish farms lose about 20% of overall volume, and one of the relevant challenges is what is to be done in order to tackle this problem. And we spent 3 years to study which processes we have at sturgeon breeding farms, and we have 2 areas, the research of the diseases in sturgeon and also in salmon. We have done a huge amount of work for sturgeon, and we have about 50 types of bacteria, the most virulent ones with the most damage that they inflicted, and the diseases that we saw at the farms, they do not play a primary part nowadays. And now the farms face the following problems. The resistance towards antibacterial treatment, and we divided that into certain classes and categories of bacteria, and we identified the most efficient antibacterial adson, and this is the table we came up with. Unfortunately, it cannot be fully used because of the drugs that proved to be more efficient, they are banned from being used in aquaculture. The second example, quite illustrative one, the use of selection achievement. And the majority of people, when they have a look on the map, on the example of the carp, they say that we have been tired from carp, but we have to recall that in the past we had about half of aquaculture production, which was carp production, and the right use of it can lead to 20% growth of biomass, and of course it will lead subsequently to growing to the increase in the profit. In here we see 9 selection achievements that we had in carp breeding. And with the crossing use, we can select it for any geographical zone of Russia, and it will lead to 20% of growth. Unfortunately, business is quite reluctant in terms of using those selection mechanisms. I'd like to kindly invite all the interested parties to visit and to attend our meeting in Rostov region, probably in October. In November, we will bring a fish there, and you will be able to ask our selections specialists some questions. Similar work is done for sturgeon production, and here we use hybrids because if we do not use hybrids, we will be facing certain difficulties. That's why we have to select the right type of hybrid for certain fish farms, and we can confidently say that we can select the proper types of hybrids for specific farms. And some fish farms, they have their commercial activities to trade it by weight, and some farms they grow fish of 2 kilos. Some do that with 4 kilos, and the most recent research shows us which advantages the hybrid types has with the Siberian sturgeon and other types of sturgeon. The most promising areas are shown here in the Far East, and also the advantages that we can get in terms of the speed of growth, and it shows a higher degree of resistance, and they are not so prone to diseases. And the last table shows us of the hybrid of Russian and Siberian sturgeon. It gives us certain advantages. And of course, the present-day selection work cannot survive without cryobiological technologies. Using the same breeds and the same types of salmon and of sturgeon, we accumulate a certain inbreeding, and cryobiology helps us to get a wide range of collection of different samples, and we actively use it currently. Over the last 3 years, we interacted with our branch in Astrakhan, and it turned out that the long-term use of the same producers, we found the relatives in these types, and we got a more genetically diverse breed, and as an added effect, we got very good growth rate and resistance to diseases. Imagine, dear colleagues, since 1979, we have been using the same origin of the sturgeon, and we can imagine that we've accumulated a wide range of inbreeding in almost all their farms, and in order to resolve it, we can take the sperm from some of these cryobanks and eliminate this situation. The combined technology that in future will allow us in sturgeon and salmon breeding to get more production and to spend less time, and we have about 2 to 3 years of breeding, and new technologies will help us to save time there in breeding, and of course we will save money on the costs. Let's get back to carp production. As of today, the situation is the following. Carp is breeded in traditional farms, and there are no new farms being built because it is too expensive. It is very expensive, and in the foreseeable future we will not see the opening of new facilities, and state-of-the-art technologies help us to grow, to breed more carp on a limited space, on a limited area, and we have concentrated feed that helps us to have a higher rate and degree of density and to get more fish as a result. It helps us to save money, and we do not buy this expensive feed. We save about 20%. I'd like to draw the following conclusion. As for protecting our health, and we are able to save about 20%, and hybrid selection program gives us about 20 to 30%, and also we can get saving of 50%. R&D gives us this advantage, and at the end of my presentation I'd like to say that according to the official statistics, what is happening in Russia? Last year we purchased about 60 million eggs and about 80% of feed. When we buy foreign caviar, we are investing into foreign R&D, and 85% of feed comes from abroad, and we are sponsoring foreign science and foreign R&D. And as for technologies, I will not even be speaking about it. About 80 to 90% of equipment has been manufactured abroad. In conclusion, I'd like to rephrase those of you who do not want to feed Russian science will be feeding foreign science and foreign R&D. Thank you. And what about the business? Do they come to you to do some experiments? Yes, quite actively we cooperate with businesses, but unfortunately it is more about the feed sector. Some players that are doing their research, developing their feed, and they'd like to see how it functions. We have very good R&D basis, and we prepare the recipes, and some of the colleagues will be talking in more details about that. It's very difficult to engage businesses because we have to come up with some research work, and then I will have to go to businesses and to offer them something. Yes, you are right, but we sincerely hope that businesses will come to our scientists because they have something to offer us. Dear colleagues, do we have any questions to the speaker? Thank you. Our next speaker is Alexander Zhigalko, CEO of Adler Trout Breeding Farm, so with the planting material. And a pointer, please. Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, our trout breeding farm in Adler was established in 1967, and the goal of establishing it was to give the fish planting material to trout breeding farms across the Soviet Union. Currently, the enterprise is a full system enterprise from the brood stock and giving all the fish planting material and also their processing products. The enterprise consists of 8 basin plots and installations and about 10 processing sections. As of today, we have more than 34,000 brood stocks and steelhead salmon and our own types of fish that we breeded ourselves in the course of the section. This is Adler and Adler Amber. And as of today, we meet the demand and providing fish planting material to 30 regions of Russia and also to 5 CIS countries, thanks to the special delivery system and the transport means. And of course, purchasing fish planting material is important for all the breeding farms, but together with that, we need to define the breed of trout. And their productivity differs and varies depending on the type of trout. And of course, it is about the differences in spawning, in the size of eggs. And when we order products, the consumer should understand everything about the temperature regimes and natural conditions, which type of trout is the proper one, and our specialists can provide such consultations to our clients. Also, I'd like to note that now the enterprise is working on implementing new state-of-the-art technologies. We bought high-pressure installations, and now we conduct experiments to get certain types of caviar with a higher growth rate. And for a producer, for a consumer, it's very important to understand how they will work with it so that the type is specified for them and is known in advance in order to sell it in the end of 2021. We also continue working on the selection process. We completed the selection process for the new type of trout, Augustin Adler. The spawning takes place in August. This is a specific feature, and it is important to get the eggs at early stage. It's very important for northern regions of Russia because it is important to get this fish planting material in time to ensure the growth. And we understand that the state is paying special attention to breeding processes, and as Viktor Yefimovich mentioned, the Federal Agency for Fisheries introduced some amendments into legislation, and since the 1st of January 2021, enterprises that are engaged in breeding receive some tax benefits. They will not have to pay taxes, and before that, in the legislation, we've had some problems, and it was the difference from, for example, cattle, and we had to pay those taxes. And we can recall the speaker from the previous conference, and he spoke about the attitude in the EU towards breeding plants, and we know that Finland is building a gigafactory, and they are paying special attention to the selection work and the breeding. Presently, we have worked out the modernization and upgrade program, and we will be able to build new facilities, incubation and hatchery and rearing facility that will help us to double our production.
And namely to receive the embryos both for our own consumption and for sales. At present, the company sells some 10 million rows of embryo, and by 2023 we will be prepared to increase the volume of sales threefolds, 3 times over, up to 30 million. And we have the incubation hatchery to increase the volumes for production of the stocking materials. Also, by a factor of 3, we will have it 45,000 tons, 4 million rows, 4 million embryos. And it will be used at our own facility, and we are planning to sell it to the trout farms in Russia. Of course, the intention is to increase the commercial products. We are planning to build the processing workshop and the canning factory. And what is important, nowadays we have received the 360 hectares of the water table in the Black Sea to grow commercial fish. I would like to note that we have partners. It is both the R&D institutes and suppliers of the specific products, both in Russia and abroad. The hatchery is being designed by a Russian design company with the supervision of the German colleagues. What is important to note that to have high-quality stocking materials, we are planning to refurbish the water treatment facilities and the condition for the upkeep of the brood stock. At the recommendation of our German colleagues, we will have the oxygenation units using liquid oxygen and the complete dissolvent of the oxygen in water. As far as support from the authorities is concerned, we are cooperating with the Rosselschool Bank. The modernization program has been approved and endorsed by our colleagues. Subsidies will be provided for the interest rates of the loan from the bank. Thank you. Ready for cooperation. Thanks a lot, Alexander. There's a question. Do you produce single gender roe? Yes, at present we take care of the human resources. The wages have been raised by 150%, and Yuri has been talking about the science, and I completely agree to his statement made that if we do not take care of the Russian science, we will have to feed the science abroad. And we should take care of the education and training of the personnel, because this sector is very promising, but unfortunately in the 90s we have lost a lot as far as capacity building is concerned. Any questions, colleagues? Okay, thanks, Alexander. Next subject matter, quite interesting. Let us talk about the recirculating aquaculture system and salmon raising. Leonid Gonstein is the first speaker. He is from AquaMav company. They are the leaders in the recirculating aquaculture system, and they have a success story of raising salmons. Microphone is not on. Thank you. I would like to thank for the invitation to speak at the forum, and let me talk about the capabilities provided by our company, as well as the advantages and the risks of the RAS. We've been dealing in it for some 30 years, and in the past 10-15 years we've been focusing on recirculating aquaculture system. It's our own technology. It is somewhat different from the similar other systems. We have certain success in raising salmons. Here is a photo which was done at Kola plant. That's the fish that has been raised over there. We build projects around the world, and one of the plant is being built in Russia. And I would like to say hello to one of my colleagues that we are working on this project together, and I hope that next year, if my colleague agrees, we will have an opportunity to invite you to this plant. This is AquaMav Poland, a center of education. We perform our studies over there and verification of our technologies. This is the picture of the full cycle from a roe, from egg to full fish. And the RAS is not a substitution of the cages and the ponds, but to complement it. And there are some limitations. It is difficult to raise an Atlantic salmon far away from the sea, and though it is, when it is lucrative when it is tempting to build such a facility close to the consumption. That's why the RAS. Here is the picture of the famous plot, Sila and Haridvi. On one hand, there are huge investments that are needed. On the other hand, it is necessary to earn money and to pay back the loans. And I would like to draw your attention to some of the considerations and lessons learned. So, how could one select the recirculating aquaculture system? You go for technology, you buy an equipment, then civil engineering, and you take into consideration the cost, the expenses, the infrastructure, and on the face of it, that's it. But no, that is not true, because there are many things that are related to the OPEX and the CAPEX. And the most important article in the costs is feed. You can make the feeding optimum, and you need the automated feeding system, because the manual feeding cannot provide the required regimes, and one need biomass measuring tools to sort out the fish, to evaluate the domination effects, and it is necessary to maintain the quality of water, and all things are included into the CAPEX. And either you include it into the CAPEX, into the technology, which falls for CAPEX, or the APEX will be quite high. And other costs include electricity, or you will have to take into account the number of the pumps for recirculating water, whether it's one or a few, and what are the properties, what are the characteristics of the pumps, whether it's a turbine. It is more expensive, but it consumes less electrical power, or it is the pump that costs less, but it consumes more power. And sometimes, if you go for paying more for electricity, you will have to spend more for connection and for spending more power initially. So the RAS calls for oxygenation, the saturation of the water with the oxygen, and it affects the OPEX, the consumption of oxygen. If you regulate the feed of the water with oxygen, you can control the expenses for oxygen. If you cannot control it, then the expenses for oxygen will be higher. Water treatment. There are different water treatment technologies. With respect to the RAS, it's quite an important issue of the technology. There might be either bio or mechanical, CO2 removal. All these things are included and related both to CAPEX and OPEX. There is another line of expenses. It is wages. If you have less headcount, then the total wages will be less. But then you need robot, RPA, automation, and the number of the pools that will have to be serviced affect the number of the personnel involved. Then roe and juveniles. And if the fish has good genes, growing fast, healthy, and it is indirectly connected to the CAPEX. And if you plan for the fast-growing fish, then that's how it should grow, because it is profitable. If the fish grows slowly, then it would affect the type of the RAS. Another line of expenses, it is the amount of the water discharged and the water to replenish the volume of the water, because the price of the new water might be different. Maintenance of the equipment. We can have a reliable equipment with little expenses for maintenance, or there might be technologies that involve a lot of repair work. It relates to the number of the moving parts in the equipment. Then management. Educating and training of the personnel is important. If the personnel is trained, then less mistakes and management systems are needed to respond to the alarms and emergencies. And technical support after commissioning, after start-up. Not that many people will think about that, but at the initial period, after the setup, it will take some time for the personnel to learn to operate it. That's why the after-sales support is needed. Then, if you choose a technology that with focus on the reliability and redundancy, then the risks for insurance will be less. So consequently, the owner will spend less on insurance. So actually over here, the chart is made up of not of two halves, but 1/3 of the capex could be included in those things that I have mentioned to making the equipment more expensive and biomeasures and fish handling and etc. So that's what I would like to draw your attention to when you will be choosing the recirculating aquaculture system. You will have to think what you need more, whether reliability, how reliable, to what extent you would like to have it reliable, how flexible should the control be, and those other things that you should take into consideration. That's the simple plan. The whole thing starts with business plans, then contract, design, construction, setup, and start up. But it should be complemented with the training, technical support, and after-sales service center that will have to work 24/7. It will contribute to the success of the operation. And in our technology, we have paid attention to the oxidization. We have the data analytics, minimum discharge of the waste, a lot of automation, a lot of RPA. We have minimized the consumption of the power supply, and all these things stipulate the low OPEX. In the future, the idea is to use the AR, use the RPA, and the plan. The ambition is to have the cloud data warehouse cloud repository, which will accumulate the data from our customers that will be willing to be part of it. Thank you. Thank you. Leonid, can we state that we have learned to raise Atlantic salmon in RAS, and it is high quality indeed? Or are there any technical issues that have not been overcome yet? There are no issues that cannot be possibly overcome. We are satisfied with the quality of salmon that is being raised in the RAS, and it's not only up to us. We receive the positive feedbacks, and it is scientifically proved in the lab. The quality is verified in the lab, so I can confirm indeed that we have learned to do that. Any other questions, colleagues? Good afternoon, Leonid. I am Anastasia, Deputy Director on Production of the Adler plant. So we have plans to expand and upgrade. Do you have any experience of RAS for a trout and a roe between 1 and 3 grams? And if the experience is present, where can we see it? And the plant in Kaluga region raise trout, and they've been buying fertilized eggs, and they've been growing it till it would gain weight. And we have just commissioned a plant in Canada for a Greek company, and their purpose was the stocking material, but for the Atlantic salmon. We cannot see there will be any difficulties in handling trout. We do have an experience.
But the question was whether we can have a look at how it is done. The enterprise in Vorovsk belongs to investors. They are owners. We can ask them to show you. The enterprise and the enterprise in Canada also belongs to Canadian or Norwegian investors. It's a Norwegian company. We also can ask them to do it and to organize a visit. But we all remember about COVID-19, and our CEO, in order to meet a customer, had to go to the US to meet this Canadian customer, because if we enter Canada, then we have to spend 14 days of quarantine. But I hope it will be over sometime in the future. Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues? Then the next speaker, Mr. Alexei Dorin, CEO of Aqua Product Company. They are building this full-cycle RAS for the production of Atlantic salmon. Alexei, the floor is yours, please. Thank you. Yes, we build RIS using Aquamorph technologies, and we hope that next year we will be able to invite you to the opening ceremony. According to Ernst & Young report, the overall volume of breeding in RAS in 2019 was mounted to 1 million tons, and in 2020 we have 2.3 million tons already. We all know the technology, and we understand that there are 3 stages of hatching and growing. and growing that to the commercial size. It's a classic technology and classic scheme, and it functions quite well. It is economically efficient, but the most recent trend, here we have the stocking at later stages in order to eliminate some negative negative factors that should be removed from processes like infectious diseases and algae and other types of parasites that can have an adverse effect on the fish. So the current trend and the next step in growing the red salmon to shift at the later stage to RAS. In 2019, the volume of raising the Atlantic salmon amounted to 2.6 million tons, and 4%, this is the overall growth, annual growth, and it's a trendy thing, and we see that in the industry. And Atlantic salmon is a very interesting type of fish. If we extrapolate this trend by 2031, we can reach the amount of 4.1 million tons. So there is a huge potential of this market for the future. And we understand that the restricting factors nowadays are environmental problems with the pollution of the sea bed, and also the migration of some agents, and there are also some seasonal things and natural conditions and some complications due to logistics. And we know that the main volume of Atlantic salmon is raised in the Far East. And we, as other enterprises, decided to localize our production with the RAS closer to the markets where we'll be selling it. In 2022, I've prepared an overview of the enterprises that already exist on the market and that are planned to be commissioned. And now we have 13 operating facilities, and 15,000 is the overall volume of output. And overall, by 2031, there will be about 30 enterprises and 900,000 tons. That was my forecast. Ernst & Young says that their volume may reach 2.3 million tons, and this is a growing trend. And colleagues think that RAS will be growing in such a significant way. So this is the overview. The Danish Sapphire, and they established this enterprise in 2013, 3,000 tons. That was the expected volume, and they experienced some difficulties due to mistakes in technological cycle in some utilities. And it's a normal thing, as Lenin mentioned before. The planning of RAS for Atlantic salmon, it's a labor-intensive procedure. You have to take into consideration a lot of different factors. There is the second enterprise in Florida, in Miami, Atlantic Sapphire. It has been already commissioned. It's an operating facility. They plan to they have different phases. The first one, 10,000 tons. The second phase, 100,000 tons, and the third phase 90,000 tons, and 220,000 tons. This is what they plan for phase number 4. In Florida, they have about 166 tons. It's a public company. They are trying to resolve the existing problems, and the shares are presented on the stock exchange, and investors show their interest in it. And we understand that it is a very interesting asset for investors. There is also Swiss ledges. Another technology was used in building it, and there is a separation into different sectors. It was built in 2016. It was commissioned in 2016, and the manufacturer is the Norwegian Danish firm Kruger. And in 2018, they started raising Atlantic salmon. They reached 60,000 tons, and they will grow it. They have very good branding, and they started selling it in retail. And as for the quality of this Atlantic salmon, it's a premium product, and it is located in proximity to Lugano, and many people in Switzerland are buying that, though it is rather expensive. Aquamorph plant, global fish. Originally, it was planned to be used for raising other types of fish, and Pear Salmon Center have joined this project, and they're producing. I visited this facility, and I was quite satisfied with their quality, and they achieved this production facility, Jurassic salmon in Poland, and they reached the amount of 300 tons in 2019, and the water resources that were mentioned by Lenny, they experienced some difficulties with that. One of the leading companies that was mentioned by Leonid as well, the Greek seafood, and they use the cage production, and 280 tons, and they plan to increase it up to 130,000 tons, and they will also include some additional modules and additional hatchery, Edel Aqua. It will be an additional module that will be built. That will be for RAS for commercial use, and also another one in Japan, the plant that is called Proximar. The first stage, they will be producing 5,300 tons, and from 2024, they plan to expand that and to reach 21,000 tons. I know it, and I saw it. Leonid can confirm that the building, the construction already started. Yes, I can confirm that. The construction is ongoing. There is an alternative technology, and Nordic Aqua Farms, they are building their complex for 6,000 tons. Now they have the first phase for 2,000 tons, and they plan to expand that to 6,000 tons. And they use RAS 2020, the new technology, and they will be producing about 1.5 thousand tons, but in future they will be producing 6,000 tons. In 2020, we saw some trade reports about 330 tons of salmon, and they sold 320 tons. Nordic Aqua Farm, they have two large projects in Man and in California, 16,000 tons of Atlantic salmon salmon in men, and they will expand that to 33,000 tons per year. And another project is in California. Another large project for raising commercial Atlantic salmon is implemented by Pure Salmon. They plan to produce about 220 tons. Now they have the engineering stage, and another stage is an investment stage that has been subsidized and financed by a large Singaporean foundation, and they already have the investment for the major part of their construction. Pure Salmon has bought Kruder Calden's company, so they added another technological partner into their portfolio, and we think that they will be implementing their project even faster. They plan to have projects in Japan, France, Italy, Lesotho, and China, reaching 20,000 tons overall. It has been already mentioned, I will not reiterate that, but RAS in Atlantic salmon helps us to check different parameters like temperature, stress, lighting, and other things. As for biological material, unfortunately, the Russian one has not been used then, and the feed is not Russian as well, but these types of things help entrepreneurs to maximize their growth rates, and of course we would like that to be Russian. And the absence of seasonality, it is one of the key factors. You can forecast the evenly distributed supplies, and some regions we can have the necessary growth. As for environmental features, environmentally friendly, and the low probability of fish diseases, for investors it is also very important, and the feeding strategy can be optimized, and it is also very important. It gives us an optimal strategy. It gives us more economically efficient effect, and less stress for fish in terms of sorting it out. As Leonid mentioned, that's a low consumption of water. We efficiently use energy and land, and our company is specializing in frozen salmon. For me, the main advantage is their location in close proximity to the markets where we will be selling, and it will be the delivery time of 1 day. Neither Murmansk nor Faroe Islands can do that. So localization is one of the key factors. Of course, there are certain problems of RAS, and Leonid has already mentioned that high capex, and it frightens investors off. The return of investment is very long because it is a very long cycle, the construction part, the investment part, and we understand that we do not have such a large flow of investors that are ready to invest into those enterprises. However, they do exist, but this is an evident trend, an international trend. And I'd like to say that we have not fully studied RAS technology for Atlantic salmon, so I'd like to say that raising commercial Atlantic salmon with the RAS, it's an experimental project, and of course there is a probability of having some other external factors. We need to apply conditioning, and it means some losses for us. And high-quality water resources, there are certain problems, and some of the projects failed because of that. Qualification of the personnel is a huge problem as well for our country and for other countries as well. The disease specialists, the hydrochemists, and other specialists are quite necessary. And also the disruption and failures in the operation of equipment, and we have to duplicate it to have the standby, and it leads to the increase of capex, which is not good. Overall, I can say that what we see here, there are various concepts of RES, the conservative structure RES 2020, and also the semi-flow concept. No matter which concept you will choose, I'd like to say personally that this RES will be used in breeding Atlantic salmon, and we hope that we will be the first of doing that in Russia. And that is everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Alexei. It's impressive. The figures are really impressive. Could you please tell us which volume are you planning to produce?
If it's not gutted, 2,500 tons, but it is quite effective, and it is refrigerated salmon in the Vologda region, Vologda salmon. Do you add any salt? Minimum amount, because we realize that there is some mineralization in water. We are planning to, but it will be at the minimum level for us to bleed this, to discharge this water. But we will do the treatment facilities. Okay, very impressive. We can keep asking questions a lot. Ready to take some questions from the floor. Thanks. Good review, very useful. And is it public domain? Is your information public domain? Not public domain. And review belongs to the investors of the project. But we can get in touch, and we can discuss it. Okay. Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Dmitry Perman. He is a partner of the fund, Russian Friends Capital Investment Fund. The same topic, very interesting. Thank you, Yuri. And I am being served as a dessert, the last but not the least. Good afternoon, colleagues. Once again, I will repeat some of the statements made by Alexei. I would like to say right away that we are investing into the RAS and investing into the industry that is dealing with the Atlantic salmon. A few words about us. We are a private investment fund. We are managing the capital of a few wealthy customers, and we invest either in the companies that are related to the innovative technologies applications that are taken from the Western markets. We take it from over there, and then we apply it in Russia, or we take the promising Russian technologies and believe it. There are some niche at the Western market that has a high potential for Russian technologies. We invest into a few industries that we focus on. These are the production, engineering, and food products. And It is in the food products sector that we got interested in raising Atlantic salmon, not only in Russia, but CIS. We have been studying the technologies for quite some time, coming to the conclusion that RAS is quite interested, and we have discussed the possible partners, and we have chosen Aqua now, and so Leonid has a club of friends over here and supporters, ardent champions of his technology. We set up Tuloma Salmon company, and its mandate is construction of the green field projects in CIS countries, and the plants are meant for raising Atlantic salmon. These figures relate to Tula project, one of them, and one of the advantages of the technology of the RAS is proximity to the consumption. This particular plant targets Moscow and Moscow region, which is a very profitable region. We are planning for this plant to be the first one, and the first one dealing in Atlantic salmon. Another plant, and it is the picture in the center of the slide. It is the plant in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Surprised as it is, though, it is the area that is famous for its meat consumption. It consumes 5,000 tons of salmon, stable demand, and we note that the habits change over there because of the youths, and Kazakhstan for us looks quite promising. It goes without saying that Kazakhstan could be even more lucrative had we not understood the export prospect. The first market that this particular plant will hit, it is Russia, and the plant that is located not so far from Almaty, and it is some 20 hours from the cities in the north of Kazakhstan, and it can also meet the demand of the landlocked region of Russia. The region that we are interested in, but we have not yet studied well, it is the western and northern China. And we understand that China, on the whole, is one of the promising regions because the nutrition habits are changing over there, and because of the growth of the middle class, all the other factors that you're well aware of. And so the potential, the capacity of China is quite high. The market is 100,000 tons, and Norwegian Council predict that in 5 years it will be some 250,000 tons. And another plant that we are planning to build, and we are the residents of the economic zone, is Khabarovsk. The plant will be intended for export to China, Korea, and Japan. And these are the markets that are import dependent from Norway, India, and Chile. And Leonid have mentioned it, and Alexei did, that there are some plants that are being built both in China and in Japan, and our plant that can supply the northwest of China and South Korea and Japan fits into the picture of locations and it will be pretty close to the consumption markets. And another plant to meet the domestic demand is the plant in Yekaterinburg. In the near future, it will be favorably positioned because the chains, the sales chains, would be happy to have it in the Urals and in the Western Siberia. So, summing up the plans and having the 2023 as a reference, we'll start the first one in Tula, and all together we are planning to build some 30,000 tons till 2027. And at the moment, we assess ourselves at the CIS market as one of the key players, and taking into consideration the development of the RAS technology. This goal is attainable. Of course, the technology will be more complicated, and so we do not see any problems in the future as far as building this capacity. We have seen this particular slide already, and we can see that the fishing is stagnating, and all the high demand is met through aquaculture. As for Russia, those ideas has been already expressed. A Russian market is one of the largest in Europe for Atlantic salmon, and 80% is imported salmon. 60% of it is frozen salmon with a long haulage leg. That's why RAS construction in Russia will not only meet the demand at the regional markets, but it fits into the Russian policies on import substitution. This particular picture was also shown. Of course, the demand has dropped after 2016 and 19. However, the market is 90,000 tons, and it's growing now, and historically there were some 60,000 tons as in fresh. But the tonnage of fresh salmons just give us an indication what would be the demand for fresh salmon at the Russian market today. As I have mentioned, more than 60% is frozen salmon, and only 40% is fresh salmon to one extent or another. And still, the Russian markets is a premium market versus the European markets because of the lack of Norwegian salmon at this market. So, as investors, we see it is one of the factors that affects the economy on the whole. Alexei has covered these factors in his presentation. It is proximity to the sales market. It is a controllable environment because the temperature and climate there is perfect for raising fish throughout the cycle of its growth. And we should note that there are no antibiotics, medicinal drugs that gets to your table, and it is intended for the end consumers. Consumers receive healthy food without any effects from the external factors. All these things that were mentioned today have been summed up, and it's double benefits, win-win for both the buyers and consumers, provided, of course, the technology of RAS is working. The quality will be stable throughout the year, irrespective of the disruption in the condition in the country of Chile. We remember when salmon died on a large scale, and it affected the supply chains. And Russia is located not so far from distribution centers, and when talking about the shelves, we can say that the shorter is logistics, then there are less risks for the chains to be disrupted. So the storage conditions should be optimum. And so throughout the year, the fish gets to the stores, to the distribution centers around the year without the worsening of the quality. So the chains of supplies is quite an important factor. Consumers will get a fresh, high quality. If we compare it with the frozen salmon, is better, and prices for the same quality are lucrative. And of course, taking into consideration the localization of the expenses, we can say that if there is a devaluation of the national currency, and it's quite sensitive for the Russian market, this segment should be more stable in terms of pricing. It goes without saying that a large share of the expenses fall for the imported goods, feed, fertilized eggs, but we understand that the offer of the feeds would catch up with the general prices after the plants in Russia will be built, and we expect that there will be local content, and the feed will be produced locally. A few words on the wholesale. We had a discussion with one of the reporters and with one of the importers, and they are importing from Chile. And Brazil is one of the major markets for Chile, and the importers got in touch with the suppliers, and Chile said, we do not have products for the next couple of weeks because Brazil is more important for us. And the risk is minimized with our projects because we are targeting the domestic farmers. The last slide. And we are investors, and we are interested in the attitude of the international investors for this market, and why this slide is important. Today, the capital markets are institutional, and the investors analyze the technologies in terms of its maturity. And RAS, though there are some challenges, but it is quite solid. And the interests of the institutionalized investors make it possible for such companies as ours or Alexei to stir up interest of the investors. And that's why we are interested in the confidence and trust of the consumers, but investors as well. And it's good that the investors will be more interested in this type of technology, and the next investment round will be held for the construction of the plants. And we can see in Russia that there is an interest displayed from the bank community, and we received preliminary interest from the leading top 5 banks in Kazakhstan and Russia, and we can only state that there is a growing demand not only from the enthusiasts but also from the crediting banking community. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. Yes, we will have to admit that there is money invested into it. There are many projects we are following up, and we wish you success. And it will be quite a heroic deed, indeed, if there will be 30,000 tons at the Russian market. Thank you. We are wrapping up. We have one more speaker, but before I would like to invite the Deputy Director of the Federal Agency on Fisheries, and he would like to make a statement. Quite a pleasant one. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues. I would like to thank the speakers and the moderator, all those of you that have taken part in the Day of Aquaculture, and the interest is very high. And making a tour at the exhibition, I have noted that aquaculture is quite high on the agenda. The visitors are interested in the technologies and the feed and on how to do that, and it is a higher interest than for the fishing industry. Everything is quite clear about the fishermen. They're discussing the contracts, they're sharing their impressions. But as far as aquaculture is concerned, there is a very vivid interest, and it's great. And once again, I would wish you all the best, and all those that have been speaking today. And I thank them for their daring projects, large-scale projects. And I know Yuri for quite a long time. We've been discussing these things. And if you compare it with the situation of some 5 years ago, I'm an owner of a company, and some 5 years ago there was a lack of trust, mistrust, but where there is a will, there is a way, and it's good that people are embracing it. And you remember there was no belief in the shale oil, and it turned out that it is possible to produce the shale oil, though there are some issues with profitability. But just you have to remember that if 30 years ago we were shown the modern cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg with the scooters and people wearing business suits and helmets, using different the space type vehicles, and the RAS is something quite fantastic, but I am sure that the time will come and it will be a reality.
And now I'd like to make an announcement. It's a nice mission for me. In accordance with the ruling of the Federal Agency for Fisheries, I'd like to award for his contribution into the efficiency of the fishery complex to give this award to Mr. Viktor Zaraysky. This award of the first degree, one of the oldest fish breeder of Russia, and he has contributed a lot into the development of Russian aquaculture. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the participants. Thank you. We congratulate Viktor Efimovich. And now we will have the last speaker for today, Mr. Roman Artonov from VNIRO, Russian Federal Research Institute of Fisheries and Oceanography. Good evening, dear colleagues, and it is nice for me to conclude this session with such an important issue, our Russian feed production, and we can draw some parallel, the feed for cattle, for poultry. Of course, the level of feed in aquaculture is quite modest, but why is it like this? This is the volume of production, and as of today, relatively, we have made progress in the recent 5 years, but we move around 300,000 tons, and the prospects are not so clear yet. And in order to estimate objectively the current situation with the feed production in our country and to identify the growth points for this area, we can have a look at the production of different entities. And what do we see here? Over the last 5 years, as it has been mentioned by many speakers today, we observe growth in the salmon, and here we have more than 100,000 tons, and the production of carp over the last 5 years has remained the same. As for valuable types of fish, we see the increase in sturgeon and in other types like whitefish, for example. What happens with the feed in this case? It's a surprising story. Over the last 5 years, as I have mentioned before, the main growth point is on the salmon types of feed, and the need for feed for them is catastrophic, taking into consideration the fact that we use mainly foreign feed, and it is like a snowball that will be growing every year. And even now we understand that 80,000 tons of feed for these types of fish are imported. And if we are guided by the report of Mr. Shostakov, he has demonstrated to us that by 2030 these indicators will be doubled, almost doubled, but the production remains at the same level. And I'd like, together with you, to find out why it is happening like this. Is it so difficult to build feed plant? Or cannot we replenish this 80,000 tons when producers of feed for cattle, for poultry, they even produce higher amounts and quantities? So let's try to organize this production. So any business starts with an idea. We understand what is the need of the market, and it is a huge need. So let's try to think about building a plant that will be producing about 40,000 tons per year. We evaluate the consumers, we evaluate the market. So there is this market, and we have to fight for it. About 15 to 20%. It can be lower price if we compare that with the foreign feed. And And if we have a look at this exchange ratio, dollar to ruble, the Russian feed will be becoming more and more popular. It looks quite simple. We evaluate risks. Do not seem to be many of them. Doesn't look like this. If we do not have enough money, we look for investors and then we start the construction. So looks quite simple. However, it's like with a boat of love that has been destroyed by everyday routine, because when we studied ins and outs of this story, which barriers are we facing, or these people who are trying to organize these businesses? Nobody takes into consideration the price of equipment, because feed for cattle and poultry, it is much less expensive than the production equipment for aquaculture feed. And this is the surprise for all the investors who are trying to enter this area. Another interesting barrier is the personnel and specialists. It seems that we have educational institutions, but there are not many of them who are that are training these specialists. But aqua feed is a different, completely different story, with a lot of nuances of production. As of today, we do not have any educational institution that can train such specialists, technological specialists and physiological specialists that can work with their progressive recipes for feed. Another barrier that is not taken into account is need to make progress, to be mobile. You have to invest in R&D. Any large production facility has its own R&D centers, and they defend the results of these centers, and they do not try to save money on establishing those centers, R&D centers. And as for recipes, it is not what is currently perceived by people. It's not just a number of components and elements that you can mix together. It's a huge amount of analytical work when you take into consideration the quality indicators for each element of the feed mixture. And in order to move forward, you have to have the proper necessary equipment, and also state-of-the-art laboratory, and of course the facility where you will use this feed. And the last barrier, it looks also quite surprising for us, the feed components. We lack the main protein element. Many people, when they hear about it, they smile and they ask us, what does it mean that you lack this component? And it's a surprising story indeed. In the country where we produce 130,000 fish flour, we cannot meet the demand of aquaculture in providing those elements. 88,000 out of this 130,000 tons is exported to China, to Korea. And what do we have left? 43,000 tons on the market. But not all this flour meets the demands of aquaculture. First of all, high protein flour should be used that does not have a lot of ballast substances. And the share of such flour, according to modest estimates, 6.5 tons on our market. market, and that is it. So when we decide to build a plant for the volume of 40,000 tons, we will not be able to find the necessary amount of protein in order to put that into practice. So, what prospects do we have, and what we have to do? Alternative sources of protein all the world, and R&D specialists are looking for alternative sources of protein, proteins from microbiological synthesis, also protein from insects and vegetable protein resources. And in order for feed industry to function properly and to operate properly, we have to develop these areas. We have to open full-scale production facilities, and we need a serious R&D center that can help us and provide those elements and components for the feed. And for this purpose, in Vniro, we established a competence center for feed, for aquaculture, and the main goal in our center is to provide scientific support for input substitution in the development, experiments, the tests, and the production of feed for aquaculture facilities. If we talking about the structure of the competence center, we used the examples of our foreign colleagues. So it comprises three main blocks. The Department of Laboratory Analytical Research over the last 3 years, 30 million was invested into the state-of-the-art equipment. Now we have everything to conduct this research, and we can do that, and we can work on the balance of recipes, and we have a very good test and production basis for extruding the feed, and it allows us to produce different types of feeds, also the starting feeds, and we can produce the samples from 0.2 millimeters up to 0.8 millimeters. And the most important thing is the Department of Fish Farming and biological tests of feeds, starting with the hatching of eggs up to getting the commercial fish. Presently, we have actually 5 regional centers of tests, of feed tests. To prove my point, I'd like to tell you that we conducted an experiment across the country. And as for Asia-Pacific region, in Interupa, in Vladivostok, on Sakhalin Island, we performed those tests, and we have had a joint program with the Federal Agency for Fisheries. We conducted laboratory research and also industrial tests in basins, and we had about 400,000 the young fish there. It's a very good example of a scientific experiment, and our Caspian branch joined this work this year, and we tried to check the different types of crawfish, and we faced the most important task is to reduce the timing for raising this crawfish, and we tested the use of feed at this facility in Astrakhan, in Rostov. The demand for crawfish is quite high, and we see here very good prospects. In Kerch, we performed the tests for the first year. And in Palingas, we tried to test how it is working, and there are some people who have the necessary expertise in the reproduction of it. And the most important sector is in Dnipro, and here we conduct the major experiments with the salmon types of fish, also trout. And the last one, in St. Petersburg, we have this center where we work with whitefish. As for the promising components that will be used in combined feed, we already have working experience with these components, and the priority for us is salmon. But together with that, we try to move forward and encompass more and more types of fish in order to provide the data that can be used for future promotion. What is the main result of our work? For all those components that I've mentioned before, we have the input standards, and as a result of it, for each of aquaculture types, we have the basic recipes that help us to adapt new components and to introduce new components into recipes and to adjust that to the production conditions. The results that we get from this work, we put them into practice, interacting with the businesses. We have an active cooperation with the feed producers, startups, and other stakeholders. Now, the main request on the part of businesses, the test of feed components, the introduction of those components into the feed. Almost everybody wants to work with salmon and trout because everybody understands that it has good prospects for the future. And feed area in our institute is one of such areas that interacts closely with businesses, and the potential is grows every year, and we have created it, and I will not exaggerate by saying that it is one of its kind center in our country that can provide this technology from scratch, and also this test of the components of feed, the necessary research, also the production of the samples, and this future test and the research of pathological effect. What happened when we carry out those tests? At that, I'd like to conclude my speech, and I will be glad to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Roman. It's very interesting. Dear colleagues, do we have any questions to Roman? Yes, I have a small question. Can I clarify, you have extruder line where you produce feed, right? Yes. The capacity, what is the volume? the so-called laboratory line, that is what it is called, like. This is production equipment that is located on 5 floors of our building. As for capacity for combined feed, we can produce up to 200 kilos per hour. And for starting feed, the minimum fraction that can be produced there, it's about 1.5 millimeters. So as for starting feed, we need to disseminate this 1.5 millimeters because we need fractions. Then we have different industrial methods and their disseminating mechanism that helps us to do this work. It's already operating equipment. I participated in commissioning this line. We initially purchased that in Dnipro, and it was not properly used. Nobody was able to use this properly, but over the last 3 years, we have produced about 15,000 tons of samples, and we have very good groundwork for cooperation, the businesses to be put into practice. The quality of granular, this depends on the extruder, but it's very cool what you are doing. It's excellent, and I hope that the state support will be rendered to it. Fortunately, unfortunately, I also participated in this plant business and the preparation of the formula with the R&D in order to be able to compete with the giants. And you are doing a marvelous job. I hope you will be supported by the state. We should not be complaining about the support. The executive management understands the importance of our R&D. We are not begging for money, begging for some equipment to be bought for us. If we have some needs, we always have a green light, and Alexei Vladimirovich is taking an active part in it. And we want to build a separate RAS in order to test combined feed, in order to evaluate the conversion ratio and to properly control the production as this area evolves and develops. We already occupied all the premises, all the place there, and Alexander decided that a special shop will be constructed for our needs, and we will be able to continue carrying out the experiments. Another question from the audience. Unfortunately, the microphone is not working. Please introduce yourself. I'm from Vladivostok. Mr. Shabakov. I'm representing a network of stores. So artificially raised fish is different from ordinary fish. And as for nutrients, it's also different. Are you working on getting the quality closer to it? It's a good and very important question. As of today, we have a separate section working on it in the institute, and we are not ready to give these results to businesses because this is the first year we have been working on it. And we have the quality indicators of commercial fish. As for trout, we have the fat and acid contents, and you understand that these contents and these fats that serve as components in feed, defining and they determine the taste and the quality of end products. That's why this year we did a very interesting experiment. I do not have final results, but we are trying to find the optimal ratio in this composition in order to have high quality products. The same applies to sturgeon types of fish, and there we even adopted a more profound approach. And we analyzed the share of carnosine in sturgeon. It's a cornerstone in wild sturgeon. There is a lot of it in wild sturgeon, but in aquaculture, it's much less. And there is the scientific groundwork to continue this work. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Hamid Tariki. I'm Commercial Director. I'm from Morocco. There's seafood. And I have a question not to this specific speaker, to all the speakers. What will be the future of aquaculture if we continuously hear that antibiotics cannot be used, some chemical components cannot be used, but we see at the same time that natural product is disappearing, and the sardines in our country, together with the mandarins, is what our country is well known for. But this year, the sardines almost disappeared, and we are main suppliers for Turkey's aquaculture, and we used to export sardines and also for growing tuna and the mackerel. And the natural product, product is disappearing, and you cannot use antibiotics in aquaculture. So what will the future look like? Thank you. Roman, please answer that. Well, I think that all the speakers can answer this question. I can only express my viewpoint and my opinion about that. As for the natural population of fish and migration is changing depending on the climate change. So if you lack sardines, you can come to our Far East because we have too much of it already. Yes, I do agree with you, but it has been a joke. But if we try to look into the future of aquaculture, of course, it's a request for high-quality product, organic products. It is growing continuously. It grows every year. When we used to have labels of organic, we looked at it. We were quite doubtful, like a UFO. But now the trend is changing. There is a shift towards organic products and antibiotics. But unfortunately, we face certain challenges and specific diseases and some other factors, and to eliminate those factors, it is quite difficult. And of course, the future lies with organic products, and in aquaculture, they will be trying to get this type of products, and we will try to help in this process. I'd like to add to it the topic of antibiotics antibiotics is currently discussed a lot, but it is exaggerated. In traditional aquaculture, they almost do not use antibiotics because it is too expensive. If fish gets sick, it does not. The antibiotics are not used. We use vaccines, and vaccines do work miracles. And I think that there is a very good prospect of a bright future for aquaculture. And if the world ocean does not provide sardines, then this place will be occupied by aquacultures. Do we have any other questions? We do not have any questions. We exceeded the time limit. And thanks everyone. I'd like to thank our speakers, our audience. We need to communicate and we need to exchange experience. I wish all of you all the best and have a nice evening.